Hi everyone. Hi, what we have for you today is something on the negative animus.
Yeah, it includes that in all sorts of ways because it reaches out from the individual out to culture, the present political zeitgeist. It then goes into individuation, mentoring, all sorts of different relationships, the ancestral psyche, even everything. So this is a different take than you're going to find elsewhere. So for those of you who are into Jung, it will be a bit challenging, hopefully a bit interesting too. So
Yes,
we'll see you
yes.
soon.
We hope
Yeah,
you find it
we
interesting
do
anyway.
indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon.
Bye now. This is the next one, and it's the notion of the negative animus as well. And we have a different way of looking at this, of course, than the orthodox Jungians. Because one of the things we focus on is the animus of the mother rather than the direct influence of the father on, say, a female child. That's often the overlooked angle. What's happened to the relating function and system of the mother towards her daughter? And in that sense, then the spectral figure in the background is like the animus as spirit in a collective sense that's passed down through recent generations. There's an almost invisible but still palpable presence in the life of the women of a family. And again, the important role of the mother in preparing the daughter to experience what men are like. And then, of course, the role of men as such directly on their daughters or granddaughters or other close male relationships. So the spectral figure of the animus is literally as a spirit and how that might pervade into the psyche of the mother in communicating with her daughter. And Pauline's got some great observations to make on this and a lot of experience of working with this particular way that the Jungian animus works down through the personality and character and the ancestral psyche of the mother towards the daughter. So this is often the overlooked aspect within depth psychology. So though we're focusing very much on the mother at the moment, that will shift and we'll go back towards the father's proper role as well. So just what a negative animus is, and as we said before about a positive animus can actually be secretly negative. Just because it appears to be positive, it does not mean it's not having a negative effect because of the demands that it makes on people, on their adaptations. And once we bring a specific cultural zeitgeist into the frame of resolution to consider and how that might be moving collectively through the feminine psyche, should we say, then the influence on the daughters of that and how the male psyche, the so-called patriarchy at a collective level may well be co-opted inappropriately, unfairly, indirectly, any other in we might want to think about in that regard, into bearing influence on a new and impressionable generation of women, then we can see how all sorts of psychosocial, cultural relationships may be damaged and how that can then roll on down the generations again. So there's a lot to consider with that, isn't there?
There is. I think ultimately, to be honest, it's far more significant than the role of the father, even if it's only because, a young female child growing up is likely to spend so much more time with the mother. So she's within her literally within her field of influence. And, the relationship to the father, obviously, and any other male figures that are present within the context of the family or the wider world as the young girl is growing up, of course, are significant, but it's a much more obvious relationship because of the difference in biological sex fundamentally. And what you were saying about it's almost a conflation sometimes. I think this is true for the anima and the animus, that the negative and the positive are often present. Video that we suggested that the guys watch, I think you put it up on Discord.
I did, yeah.
Between the coach, the female coach who was there, and the psychology professor with whom she was having a conversation, because you saw the positive animus in action when she came in with her, she kind of challenged him on his intellect, really, on his understanding of his knowledge of Jung and archetypes. But at the same time, you could feel the negative pole of the animus moving towards the positive in case she was going to have to do a complete and utter takedown of him. So it was as if they were present at the same time, and depending on his reaction, you'd either see the face of one or the face of the other, but I think they were absolutely both present. But it's important to realize that it isn't necessarily an either or for the animus or the anima. Things are much more dynamic than that, aren't they, in the moment, in terms of relating.
Thank you. That describes a field phenomenon within which these elements, as you say, are infodynamically present and exchanging their amplitude according to the inner and the outer dynamics that are going on, both within an individual and whatever scenario is being acted out.
Yeah, most definitely.
But there are, of course, certain things which are of importance for the present culture as well, the way that younger women's minds have been shaped, and how that's basically come through the collective female psyche, rather than the male.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And you've only got to look at something like radical feminism to see that and to understand that is, it's almost the negative animus par excellence, really. And it can be it has been incredibly influential, as it's built up over the decades, and obviously it's been expressed differently according to the times in which those women lived, according to the zeitgeist. But the idea that it's not still present, as I was saying to you the other day, wasn't I? I think it was about Piers Morgan's book. I can't remember the title of it now. It was something along the lines of The Death of Woke.
Oh yeah.
And I just thought, really, are you kidding me? That really, we are not rid of it, not yet, not by a long shot, I don't think.
No.
And I think that's because we haven't properly tackled the negative animus as it represents itself through the collective female psyche. So that's where the issue is. And we will see, won't we?
We will. So this will bottom out in the ancestral psyche and the Paleolithic adaptations that we were discussing last time, and the fact that the animus is not an inner man. There is no minority of male genes in a woman that inclines her to have this inner opposite. That was a belief Jung had. I'm sure he sincerely believed it, but it's not borne out by genetics at all. What is obvious, though, is that it relates to the anticipation of the masculine, and that there's a primary platonic and then a secondary biological reason for that. So both the platonic, that is to say, the original field of representation that has ingressed into biology through evolution, and even before that through ontology itself, primary ontology, that has set up how the so-called animus for Jungians takes its specific manifest form. And that, of course, then is going to involve politics, because Freud seeks Adler, Adler conceals Freud, according to the Freud-Adler-Jung equation. And that's pretty much what we're seeing. And it's the same, of course, for the anima as well. The anima is not an inner woman. For the same biological or genetic reasons, but it is anticipated biologically, as Anthony Stevens and his work with the ethologist has pointed out. But there's also the Platonic representation that Jung hinted at himself directly, that there is some primary, he called archetypal representation. And of course, remember, he borrowed the term archetype from Plato directly. And it's how these things interact that's of importance. So women need to understand that this belongs in them. And men need to understand that what's called the anima belongs in them and not in women. If we're to see as men women as they really are, we have to own that. We have to integrate the projection and understand it. That's basic Jung at that level, at least. that in understanding it, we immediately have to go to biology to give us its fullest meaning in biological terms, and then ultimately we need to go to the Platonic to see where all this has come from in the first place and where it might be going. Now, there was something in Congress in the US a few days ago. I don't know whether you saw it. It's available on YouTube. There have been other examples. A female doctor was challenged directly with the question from a congressman, can men give birth? And she would not answer. She just danced all over the place and fundamentally refused to answer. And what you see with that is that the classic Jungian notion of an idea seizing hold of a woman, a professional, intelligent, educated woman, seizing hold as a form of collapse, which represents power and influence over not only that immediate interaction with the congressman, but at a cultural level. So she flat out denied her medical training. She would have been present at autopsies, examined cadavers of both biological sexes. She would have had to have learned about the reproductive systems. She would have had to have learned about the differences genomically between men and women, the X and Y chromosome difference that defines them at that genetic level. She would have gone through all of that, and yet she can sit there and dance on the head of a pin and avoid saying that men cannot be pregnant. And even though the congressman said that it's been established apparently in the Supreme Court in the United States that biological men and biological women are different. So this is what we're up against within the culture once an idea takes hold at a collective level. And that is scale invariance. And this is an important thing to appreciate. You collapse that down again to the level of the family, then according to Jung, that predisposition to be seized by an idea, an ideological representation of something which brings power and control about, for him was present in women, and he would have called that the negative animus, which, as I say, is to blame men for that particular kind and particular quality of collapse. I think that's unfair. This is something that has emerged for evolutionary and ontological reasons into the psyche of women. Now, men, of course, have their own problems to do with their so-called anima. But ultimately, we need to move away from the idea of an anima or an animus as being some kind of biological sex or even fluid gender representation. And I would go so far as to say the idea of a fluid gender representation actually moves it towards being explained far more readily as the relating function and relating system, because at bottom that's what it is. It's about relating internally, externally, so intrapersonally, interpersonally. For that you could remove the notion of the gender and just say it's that, but then you'd have to say, well, why do things cluster in the way that they do? So there is some kind of typical, Jungians would say archetypal, configuration that these take on the basis of biological sex. And then suddenly the idea of the anima and the animus has some leverage at that level. So we need to be able to move between different scenarios, different levels of analysis, description and explanation, but realize that the process is scale invariant as well. So it goes down to the level of the family, as I've just said, and it's also intrapsychic, it's within the personality. These configurations seem to operate there. They operate in individuals, operate in families, social groups, cultures, religions, and so forth. And the representations of them occur in myth, just as Jung said. But what is it that's being represented? Is it the inner woman and a man? Is it the inner man and a woman? It can't be that. That's something we can safely set aside as being the primary cause, the archetypal, if you like, imprint or cause. It's to do with the configuration when it's the animus, so-called, in the psyche of a woman. It's been part of a woman's psychology and biology, And likewise with a man, the anima is not an inner woman. It's part of male psychology. You don't find the anima configuring like that in women. Now, if it wasn't in a woman, well, then we would expect to find the anima emerging out from women, and it would describe their inner world. Because the inner world of a woman, according to Jung, is the inner world of a man, in the sense that the configuration that the pardon me, personality takes represents that opposite other. I'm sure you can see that there's a contradiction immediately there, because Jung also says that the inner world of the woman is the animus. So there's lots of inconsistencies in the traditional analytical psychology Jungian model of what these things are. If we simplify that and say this is relating, that's how it manifests. There is no anima within a man unless it is operational as a form, a system of relating internally and externally. If the relating element is absent, then there is no anima. It's not there. But there's something very collapsed about the term anima, and it's very specific. It has, as I say, some leverage, but we have to find it. We have to look for it, and it doesn't explain relating as a whole once we collapse it into that particular frame. It's just that it tends to get projected, and that's for Darwinian and Freudian and Adlerian reasons principally. And then ultimately, if we work the positive side of the so-called Anima and Animus sufficiently, then what we get then is a properly adapted Jungian Platonic level of relating to ourselves and to others, including the opposite biological sex. So that then should be the culmination of everything else. Hence Freud, Adler, Jung in those specific stages. So I know we've got a lot of men here today, and you've all had experience, I have no doubt, of being the object of, shall we say, understanding through a lens which is coloured by the concept of the animus. In other words, women will judge you according to that innate predisposition they have to see men.
Could I just make a quick comment about
By all
the
means.
Female doctor,
Yes, please.
Steve? Because if we take a field perspective and try and have a field understanding of what might be going on for her, I think what we're seeing is both what we would call anyway, both positive and negative Jung represented in one woman. And the positive pole, as you say, is probably her calling, her desire to do medicine in the first place, and of course it's intellectually challenging as well, which is all good.
Yeah.
But the opposite side of that is the woke ideology. It's and you could say that is negative Jung, this idea of getting behind a cause, if you like, which is religious in nature, intrinsically that way, and it's almost as if they're vying for attention within that one woman. And unfortunately it seems to be that negative Jung has a higher valency out of those two components, if you like, and it's almost as if the woke ideology is a higher ideal even than wanting to study and do medicine as a vocation. And you can see those competing forces within the same woman. It's almost as if she wants to answer him but daren't, because then she would have to betray the woke side of her own nature, and the fact that she's been captured in that way by an ideology. So it's it beggars belief, doesn't it, when you, as you say, when you look at someone and listen to somebody who is meant to be intelligent, and they've so literally sold their soul to that extent that they can't even answer a simple, or won't even answer a simple question about the biological nature of men and women. So that's in terms of the culture, that's what we're up against. with women who have been captured in that way. And often, unfortunately, often it is intelligent women. It's often women who, come from maybe a middle class background, socially as well, that they've been, they've had those comforts growing up, which has allowed them maybe more than the average woman to experiment with ideas, maybe even indulgent to some extent, and have probably never really had to be up against a real man in that way, because he wasn't going to back down. That was quite clear in that situation. And I think that was a good thing, because it just drew her right out. And then you could see the polarity. You could see literally the neurosis in her.
Yeah. So in that we can see some confirmation observationally of what Jung postulated that his construct of the animus, I beg your pardon, would actually be like in a situation like that. So again, if we're going to pressure test a scenario like that, we need the full context. So we need to know what's the background, the cultural background that these ideas are emerging from. And then we have to look at biology as well. I mean, when Jung said, for example, about archetypes, that only religion can give a name to some of these forces, I think religion does give names to such things, various religions, various names. But I would disagree that that's a complete explanation because of superpositioning. There's a biological reason for us as well. And that is really, really powerful at the moment in the culture. And it's interesting that the so-called woke people are moving as far away as possible from a biological explanation for anything.
That's how they get away with it.
It's how they get away with it. They deny biology. She was sitting there denying biology and claiming that her view, including her own, and claiming that her view was scientific. Now that is complete nonsense. She can hold whatever view she likes. If she harms people with their views because of the position she occupies and the power she holds, that is properly a matter for government in the US and the law to deal with that, because the needs of the many should, in a democracy, outweigh the needs of the few. But she can hold that view, but she has to be accountable for that view. And there was no indication or inclination that was visible within what she was saying or her demeanor or anything like that she had any intention of being accountable. For her, it was a fact. And it was at the highest level of science that it was the case. She actually said that. So that's crazy.
Well, she wouldn't have lasted very long in the Paleolithic, would she?
No.
With with that perspective on things.
And that's why biology is the major player here. I feel that's actually the Darwinian selective pressure, which is operating beneath the level of culture, politics, and even religion as levels of analysis and description. We need those, but we need the biology too.
We do. Well, it's not being related to, so it's running autonomously, in effect, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's a field effect that is superposition between all of those levels. And then people select the level they want, apparently, to leverage whatever power or influence they feel that they need. And yet, are they, and Jung again is right about this, are they actually the authors of their own ideas? Do they think they've come to these conclusions themselves without influence from others? Now, he would talk about the unconscious being behind that, and he would talk about a collective psychosis, for example. And again, that's a good explanation, but it's not complete, because it's like, where did it come from? Why is it contra naturam, apparently, that this is just going to crash a population and a culture completely and create a void, a niche space which is voided? And what process, force, or representational dynamic could possibly support that? And it can only come from biology, or at least that's the next level before we start to look at what's almost unthinkable, and that would be that the Platonic might actually intend that as well, because for the Platonic to be instantiated, biology has to be working properly. Therefore, the competitive element has to be present. Darwin being the efficient cause of Plato, metaphorically, in this. So it's interesting, isn't it, that we need to consider what are the origins of the ideas that people hold collectively that they then identify with. Really, what's the true origin? And then look at the manifestation of that. I mean, in psychotherapy, this is very important as well, because the presentation of a person, the configuration of their distress or maladjustment tells us a great deal manifestly, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what's causing it. The cause is often hidden by the manifest symptoms and maladaptations. So again, we can say it's scale invariant, and it can operate at a cultural level, at an individual level, in terms of their psychosocial interaction, but also on the inside. So there's a great deal to consider about that. That is relevant for our personal development, for psychotherapy, and the times in which we live. But that view that she expressed not too long ago would have been considered to be a delusion, a psychiatric symptom that would have required her to be removed from working as a medical doctor for the safety of the public, because it's not based on anything that is objectively rational.
I mean, it is effectively still that.
Yeah.
But it's only because the culture tolerates it that it's considered to be normal and adapted. But really, it's not. It is still a delusion.
It is a delusion.
Yeah.
And it becomes a shared delusion, the level of the dyad, the folie à deux, as the French call it. In other words, two people who believe a delusion and reinforce one another. But it can go beyond that. It can go to a collective level as well, particularly where power dynamics are operating, and where those power dynamics conceal aspects of Freudian pressure, where there'll be short-term or delayed gain for following that, but there's still another level again, and that's the cruelest of all. That's the harshest cut of Occam's razor, which will be basically the deletion of a breeding population that have shown themselves to be not fit in a Darwinian sense to reproduce. And if that reaches a certain point, becomes catabolic and runs away of itself, then there will be a population crash. And there'll be a progressive identification with the delusion as being rational. So when I said before it's irrational, it'll start to take on the representation of rationality, because it will become accepted collectively as being correct. But that will not stop Darwin. It won't stop Darwin armed with the machete of Occam's razor to prune away people who are falling for that. And it will void a niche space, and then another population will spread and so forth. And then at that point, biology won't care. It'll say reset, and off we go. Because biology does have a long view at a collective level. At an individual level, it's one lifespan, perhaps the lifespan of children or grandchildren in potentia. But the perspective is longer than that. It's long-term adaptation and the expression of fitness and challenges to biological fitness. So we're living in very interesting times where Jungian ideas, as they were framed, they never really did fit that accurately. But the environment now is so highly under biological pressure that we have to look at that. We can't afford to be psychoreductive any longer, or move into a transpersonal perspective and treat archetypes like they were gods and deities and some kind of new religion or what have you, because the real engine of selection, as I say, is coming in at a biological level, and we just see its manifestation in that way. So lots of things then can come online, things that are unpleasant to talk about, like Thanatos. And as you guys, I think, will know, that was originally a Freudian construct to do with what's called a death drive. Freud didn't identify it as such in that way, but it's what he meant by his understanding of Thanatos, which is basically a return to an inorganic state. In other words, the decomposition, apparently willfully, of a life, so it just goes back into the pool of detritus. In other words, I know it's awful to speak like this, but it's what you see. There is usually a point. It's like an event horizon, and it's in an individual or it's in a culture. It reaches the point where that collapse is inevitable, either because the individual system is given into that process, or the collective level when a civilization or a culture decides to catabolically reduce itself into nothing. And of course, what that does is, as I say, it opens up new niche spaces. So Darwin will agree. But you guys are in a position to be part of the solution for that. And as Anthony Stevens himself said about you guys, about our students, that you're in a position to contribute to the survival of humanity. That's not to burden you with something which is beyond your individual capacity. But each human being that we can reach to in a positive way will bring about a better adaptation than occurred before. Others will be doing something similar, and then hopefully a critical point will be reached, and then an antiodromia, as Jung talked about it, the running contrary to the progression thus far, the catabolic progression will kick in. So that's something that we have to really address, that even if we feel helpless at a cultural level, by working with individuals, there will eventually be an emergent Sheldrakean field effect, which will mean that through that field, what other people are doing will add to what we're doing, and vice versa. And then the changes will start to occur, both at a political and a grassroots level. And point lies, we are apolitical. We're not bothered about left, right, or centre in that regard. We're fundamentally humanistic in orientation. So we take it that what is right for the species is the right thing to do, from the biological right through to the transpersonal and spiritual. So that would be Aristotle's golden mean, not an inert mean, that is to say an average or position between a polarity, but something that represents where all the energy is for change. It has to be that way, otherwise there'll be continuity, and continuity will run away of itself towards collapse. So there you go. That's how we would see the effect of the negative animus, and even the negative anima, working through individuals at a cultural level. Fergal, thank you for being patient.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you. That's very interesting. Just what you were talking about, the doctor there sort of refusing to answer questions as well. I've actually watched a certain number of Senate hearings, and I've never heard anybody answer a question as well. And directly, always avoiding the question as well. And well, there's a whole part to this. What that brought me back to was the fact that people, or what I've seen of people operating in politics in the United States and Germany and the UK as well, is that an unpolarized position is unacceptable. And I think what I noticed, what it reminds me of is watching The Apprentice, the one with Donald Trump in it back in the day as well. And there was two teams, and one team was arguing her point, and she was arguing it quite validly. But then the other team said something like, "But you did this," and she said, "Well, yes, I did this, but I did it because of this." But the fact that she had agreed with the other team meant Trump fired her on the spot.
Really?
Don't you? You don't. You've agreed with him. That's the end of the story.
Yeah.
So that and obviously now being president there as well, that seems to be the situation. An application of that situation, that if you ever accept anything other than the polarized position, then you consider yourself undermined and your point is no longer valid as well. So I'm kind of just considering that, particularly when you're talking about power dynamics concealing Freudian pressure.
Yeah.
And to what extent sort of the power dynamics that people are under, if an unpolarized position is unacceptable, then just psychologically, the power dynamics concealing Freudian pressure does lead to madness internally. It leads to this sort of whatever it is, the unexpressed feeling, and that manifests itself as things that are ostensibly not true, but the truth of that kind of underlies is more about the failure to resolve a power dynamic that exists there previously.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of what I was thinking of a little bit there. And then you get Thanatos, as you said, which is in nature, from the nature point of view, is almost a cleansing process.
Yeah, I think you raise a very, very important point there, that if we approach it rationally, that's the clearest observation, that you're in a no-win position unless you agree with one side or the other, and then clearly, and then battle commences. And that's probably what's actually happening at the Darwinian level. They're looking for, or it is looking as a principle, for contention to sort out who will be dominant. It seems that this issue of survival of the fittest is about that more than anything else. So whoever can control the environment and ultimately control reproduction will serve the genes and ultimately therefore the genome. But because the genome seems to have a long-term view, it's quite happy to skip several generations before a different viewer turns up, because it's prioritizing the most vigorous of approaches to things. And I think it's valid to misdirect people who are trying to harm us, insofar as an adaptive strategy, which would be agreed with by Darwin, would be, under certain conditions, to go against our own apparent principles, at least externally, but we hold them on the inside, and then appear to give ground for the sake of adaptation, whilst maintaining what once would have been called a conscience about something, which would be our congruence with our own values, because otherwise we will be selected against. And that again is failing the Darwinian stress test. So the people in Eastern Europe during the Soviet regime, they had to suppress everything. They had to suppress their beliefs. But once that regime collapsed across the Eastern Europe, then everything that was present before, that had been suppressed and repressed, appeared. People had been reading books, saving books, been practicing their religious faith, that kind of thing. That all re-emerged. Happened in China as well, with the Cultural Revolution, that sought to extinguish the old ways. But the deep underground of Chinese culture survived. It's still there and it's tolerated now. So the Chinese communists are getting the balance right, but at first they were very, very Darwinian. Now hopefully in the West we won't have to live through such a long dark night of the soul. But the fortitude has to take root in the individual, and then progress from there. In relationships and family dynamics, people that may come to us for therapy, they may be in a similar situation where they have no control, they can't own their own thoughts, and they have to manufacture something that allows them to survive and thrive in a reductive environment. And they'll very often go to therapists for, as Jung himself has said, for the same reasons that people would want to have gone to religious figures, the clergy, to confess that they have a different view, or to some kind of psychopomp or mentor or what have you, and hold that as an inner secret. It's even in the Gawain story. He emerged out from a group of people who thought themselves to be elite in every respect of virtue, martial prowess, everything. And he went through an experience where he had to confront something that changed him. But when he went back, in order to survive in that environment, he had to hold the secrets on the inside of what he had learned, and then use that to grow and to develop and hopefully bring about a different future. So he lived with the lie of adaptation. And that does, provided that we have the ego strength to do it, that does satisfy Darwin. If we don't have the ego strength, that's when we become quite badly neurotic.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to live with if we fall back only on our ego. And our sense of what is right and wrong, our morality, ethics, and so forth, because they are big ideas. They're fundamentally biological, but they represent themselves to us as elevated ideas. They're transpersonal. And if we are called to either follow that by conviction to oppose the others, we may well get deleted. But being able to conserve something on the inside for investment later on, or by association with people who have similar ideas in order to build a counter movement, that has always happened too. And that probably in some areas of the West at the moment is the best adaptation. The UK is now under a tyrannical government. There's no question about that at all. And there will be resistances of different kinds. Some of those resistances will be more risky. And as you know, people have been jailed for considerable amounts of time simply for posting on X, Twitter. Association, free association is being repressed. Free speech, definitely, of course, but also freedom of thought, where people admit to silently contemplating, it could be called prayer, certain things within, say, 200 yards, 200 meters of an area within which such things are prohibited. If they're questioned by the police and they admit that they are thinking in that way, they are arrested and imprisoned for a thought crime. And the degree of surveillance in the UK is greater than in North Korea. And it's extending all the time as that government moves away from jury trials, for example, moves away from the common law, which has existed in its present form pretty much since the late 11th century and earlier than that, to the middle of the 9th century, arguably, and it's being removed by this tyrannical regime. And I say there are resistances. Some are more obvious than others. The obvious ones are being taken out. They're being deplatformed. They're being arrested. They're being imprisoned. Various figures are appearing to occupy that role. If you're familiar with British history, there was the Peasants' Revolt, as it was called, of 1381, led by a common man called Wat Tyler, who nearly brought the medieval establishment down. And he was isolated and murdered in full view as an expression of power of the people who had associated. They'd come together for a common purpose. They didn't ultimately want to get rid of the establishment. They wanted the establishment to change. And a man stepped out and he was tricked and he was murdered. And then the establishment overrode their concerns, sent them back to their villages, and then they were punished there. They were isolated and punished. So this kind of strategy and tactic, including the kind of resistance, has historical precedents which are probably biological at root. And that kind of thing is underway now. Mm. But with the scale invariance, we have that kind of tyranny when someone is occupied, their ego is occupied by a complex and identified with complex which seeks to completely misdirect their life and make that person obey the rhetoric of the complex and support its maintenance. Mm. So similar dynamics there, Fergal, at all levels.
Yeah. And the general solution being a fortitude in your heart and ego strength, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, ego strength is incredibly important. Yeah. I was just thinking a little bit too, well, a couple of things actually. One was the context of The Apprentice that you mentioned, Fergal, and the divided reaction of the woman that you highlighted. I don't know the full context of it, but just purely on what you've described, it almost sounds, again, and this is the conflicted position some women find themselves in when they are at odds with their biology, in that it sounded to me as if, first of all, the animus steps forward, because it's driven by power, principally, particularly the negative animus, and looks to occupy a space within what is essentially a very competitive environment. After all, everyone who is there wants to win, wants to be the apprentice, and but at the same time, it's as if she's been betrayed by her feminine instincts, because by and large, and this will sound sexist, but there we have it. I think women tend to be, because of their care instinct, more agreeable, in the sense that they would be more amenable to persuasion, to influence, suggestion, if you like, in a collective situation like that, where they might feel under pressure to agree with other members of that group. And I think there's probably a little bit of both gone on there. I think we've seen her own personal ambition come to the fore, otherwise she wouldn't have been there in the first place, but also the tendency, because of the instinctive drive to want to get on and to be agreeable with other people in that social sense, has taken over and cost her actually her ambition, which in arguably in some regards might not have been a bad thing. It's probably a shame it doesn't happen more often in some regards, but it probably took somebody like Trump to do that.
Yeah.
Whatever we think of him politically, and I have no interest in that whatsoever, but he's somebody who is going to be quite formidable in that regard, and he's not going to take any, he's not going to be upset by the idea of firing someone, for example, man or woman for that matter.
Yeah, of course, he's the ideal target, if I could call him that, for Animus projections, either positive or negative.
Absolutely.
Positive, he's the leader of the pack, he's the chief of the tribe, and he can provide great resources, he can take resources off other people, and all of these things at a fundamental level will be of interest to some women, but others will see him as a threat, principally because he will not benefit them individually. So the more degree of freedom there is, in other words, the distance he is as an animus figure in the classical Jungian sense away from any individual woman, the more hostility that woman is likely to feel towards him. Whereas women who are probably on the same side of the political configuration as he is will have a degree of identification where they feel some benefit for them at the Paleolithic level. So it will drop into a polarity with him. And then if you put all of that into the wider context of the dynamics that are underway at the moment in culture, then we'll see the other kinds of compensations from other men towards him, either favorably or otherwise. But that will include Machiavellian types who will gather around him to replace him at the earliest opportunity. And he will have to manage them so he keeps his closest rivals very close to him, and offer them benefits in the mid to long term through a succession. If he looks weak, they will take him out probably, or they'll do their best to do it. And I'm talking about his closest political allies, not the obvious enemies that he's had, say, during his first term, but those immediately around him. So there's all sorts going on, but it's fundamentally it's Paleolithic.
It is. And the other brief point I was going to make was in connection with what you were saying about the zeitgeist more generally in the UK here, and the establishment and so on. And it's personal to us, in that it's happened this morning. Our daughter comes back from her MenCap club, where she's basically just doing like a little English skills course.
I don't know about anything.
You
about
don't know
this,
about
by
this.
The way.
No, you don't. I know you
so
don't.
If I look,
no, I know
shocked.
I know you don't. I've not had a chance to tell you. But she's been asked to provide ID in the form of, say, a passport or something like that. And when you think about the level at which these things are pitched for people who are learning disabled, it's like the most ridiculous request imaginable. But she's been asked to do that, and then the next logical step is that, well, MenCap is funded by the UK government. That's all you need to know, really. Enough said.
Okay, so for context then, Starmer, the UK incumbent tyrant has just had his drive to have digital ID compulsory, to say that you will not be allowed to be employed or to earn money unless you submit to this digital ID process. That's just been knocked back by a rebellion in his own party. So his huge majority in Parliament won't be able to carry that forward, so he stepped back. But that's likely to be something that was put in place in anticipation.
It's a perseveration of that, isn't it? Beyond what's happened more recently.
And then anticipation that would come about. So there you go. They do all sorts of other things, that organisation as well, don't they, with vulnerable people.
They do.
And try and move them towards woke.
Absolutely they do. I mean, without going into detail, yes, but there are, shall we say, members of staff who to whom you have to use the appropriate pronouns, put it that way. So it's well infiltrated.
That ideology's
it's well infiltrated. Captive audience, isn't it?
They're vulnerable.
And captured audience as well.
Absolutely.
Insidious, really, but there we go.
I was wondered a little bit there, just what, as you pointed out as well, is sort of might be a female biological skill at bringing people together. That if women are repressing their biological instincts against in the opposite direction.
Absolutely.
Then there's that I don't know, maybe male instincts have a much more single mindset sort of focus on things rather than on conciliation. But if that's happening, then you're losing something of the balance that prevents the polarization, which it feels like it's been a snowball for a while, but it's removing the negative feedback, and I mean negative feedback in a positive sense, as a dampening effect on something, and then even worse than that, sort of taking some of those instincts and putting it aside into something which actually generates a positive feedback in the bad sense, as something that can just get out of control. So it's tricky times, I think, for that one.
Well, I mean, if again, I don't know the full context, Fergal, so I'm kind of sort of commenting cold on it in a way, but if the woman concerned had been a bit more intelligent about it, I mean, it's common knowledge that Trump likes women. He probably doesn't like women who are aggressive in the animacy or traditional animacy sense, but if she played her cards right, she might have been able to appeal to him in a different way.
Through his anima,
absolutely.
Not as an inner woman, but as an outer woman that allows the genetic anticipation and expectation to move out favourably towards her.
That would have been a good night's move, wouldn't it?
It would. So you don't need an inner woman to do that.
No.
You need a real outer woman.
Yes, you do indeed.
To make that effective. At a relational level.
Definitely. And I think he would have responded very differently had that happened.
He tends to, doesn't he? With women who know how to play him.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Fergal.
Thanks, Fergal. So, do you think it's worth going back to the card then?
Probably,
and bringing in some issues to do that you understand far better than me about feminine psychology and how these things move around between them, the relationships between women through the animus, the biological, genetic and social rivalry, that kind of thing, how they may turn children against parents, and how they may be unconscious of various things or consciously, and the positive side of it. It's all important to understand this.
Well, you've kind of covered the extent of it, really. I mean, rather than it being a monologue on my part, it might be useful to have some questions from the guys. That would be good.
Okay.
Yeah, some prompts as to where to go with it.
Do we need the card up, or
we could do? It's good to have a visual representation, isn't it? Because it's the bandwidth of it, isn't it? That is helpful.
What we could do then is ask first if anybody would like to put their head above the proverbial parapet and say, I'm happy to get involved in this as a man, or not. Would anybody like to get the ball rolling? If not, we can always default to monologues by me, and that's boring, I know, but
well, it would be useful
yeah,
to hear some of the guys' experiences of women that have, from their own perspective anyway, have configured negatively for them. I mean, that might be useful
in the
to
context
hear.
of the
in
animus.
the context of the animus, yes. Yeah.
And there's no huge rush, is there, to volunteer? And
no.
that's okay. I understand. It's quite potentially iffy ground, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll get the image back up.
Okay.
We can find it. Here we go. Okay, Paul, so there's any number of configurations of relationship here, but we're talking about how the animus can influence down through generations, and how the mother's animus can be more important than the actual biological father for the, say, the daughter. The father's absence here, it's more to do with that influence that's come down, because that can be bounced off the daughter from the mother and over onto the father or the husband negatively. She could be turned against that because of a relationship that she's had, for example. Fergal.
Yes, very easily. Yeah.
Sorry, Megan.
Oh, good help.
I wasn't specifically about that picture there as well, but I mean, in terms of a relationship with a woman who has like a negative animus, or in particular like a poor relationship with her father or something like that.
Yeah.
I've found that very testing, but there's benefits from being tested as well, if you can process that. And that kind of, I've found that can kind of feed back in sort of different ways through the relationship. But certainly what feels like projection can be very difficult to deal with. But particularly when it sticks, you know, there's something that, you know, that's being projected, it's hooking onto something in yourself. So I've had a good bit of struggle with that over a period of time, but I found going inward and processing that has been actually quite beneficial to me, if not ultimately for a relationship, but it's a growth opportunity.
Yeah.
I can I put it that way, even if it's a difficult process to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, Jungians would say, obviously, that the negative animus kicks off the negative anima in effect. So there's almost an inevitability about that. But I think what you're describing, Fergal, is the ability to have sufficient ego strength that you don't allow yourself your own homeostasis to be knocked out as a result of that interaction with the other person who is insisting on maybe transferring or projecting onto you negatively. And that requires a fair amount of ego strength to be able to resist the field of influence of that other person. And we probably all struggle with this because we are essentially, social beings, and so it's very difficult we can't live, completely in isolation of other people. So where we do interact, I think the ability to develop ego strength is absolutely essential, and being able to take a step back and to see why either negative animus or anima is configuring the way that it is in another person, and to be able to see it as that, to have that separation from it, is an index of ego strength, really. That's not to underestimate the difficulty of trying to do it, because it is a challenge. But I think, as you say, the positive side of that challenge is that if we do manage sufficiently to step back from it, that ultimately we will learn something from it about ourselves and about the other person with whom we're relating. So in some regard, it is worth seeing it, I think, in that way, and as something that potentially could be turned around and ultimately have a positive outcome.
Yeah, for the mother to child, I guess that's a trickier one again than you'd
Yes.
have between a guy and some person who's not directly related to. But I think what it felt like to some extent was that I can really see this negative animus, the place where this person is coming from. But in this particular situation, at least, it felt like much more like a testing process, like identifying all your weaknesses and pushing those buttons. And that feels like an attempt to resolve the negative animus in terms of searching for someone who may
Yes.
never live up to those ideals, or it's 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 a bit like the psychotherapy process as well. All these things that are put out to test the ability to trust somebody else. Felt like that was coming through certainly quite strongly in that. Whether it might help resolve things, but it's just a few thoughts on that really. That there seems to be an attempt to resolve a negative animus by identifying every weakness in order to find somebody where those weaknesses aren't, I suppose.
Yes.
Would that be a possibility or?
Almost definitely. I think what you're suggesting is that it's almost as if it is seeking, through transference and projection, it is seeking its resolution. It is seeking something that will oppose it in effect, and not necessarily as in cancel it out, but that will push back.
And then the negative feedback that Phil was mentioning that earlier, that kind of thing. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a field phenomenon, isn't it?
It is a field phenomenon.
It will go both ways,
It
so
will.
to speak, between that. But obviously, everything that we've said in the past hour and a bit up to this point needs to be taken as a complete picture, doesn't it, rather than as an abstraction?
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to do because there's so much that we've covered. One of the things that we've noticed and that you've helped me to understand that, over the years is the influence that can come from what Jungians might think of as the mother's animus towards a daughter about how to relate to men or not to relate to them, or to be incapable of relating to them. And at that point, the impression or anticipation of the masculine for such a daughter takes on a spectral form, takes on a virtual sort of quality that's indefinite, and through being indefinite it becomes threatening because she may not have had a proper way of understanding how to relate to the problem of relating to men and to herself and her own place in the world. And this happens in families all the time.
All the time. Well, you could argue in a way it's the mother's job to model how to relate to men in a way that is adaptive and is obviously going to benefit the daughter when she goes out into the wider world. So there is a huge amount resting on it. And I think, as we said earlier, this idea of the mother actually being more significant in terms of her influence even than the father comes into its own here. It's as if it goes right back down the matrilineal line, the ability to, or as the case may be, not to be able to relate to the masculine, as it is literally handed down through generations of women to whoever is sort of the present incumbent with respect to receiving that influence. And I really do think that relationship, mother-daughter, is so pivotal. Thank you. To the daughter's development, and as you rightly say, how she then relates to her own personal father, because the influence of the mother is so strong very often within the home that it is absolutely possible for the father to be scapegoated when it comes to the actual, the family constellation. We see it over and over again clinically, don't we?
We do.
And that is incredibly sad, I think, when that happens. And a lot of that, as you were inferring earlier, is to do with, to some extent, the competition that exists at a biological level and at other levels between mothers and daughters, and in terms of their own development, in terms of their relative ages as well to one another, because clearly for women, age in a certainly in a biological sense, a reproductive sense, is more urgent, say, than it is for men. And so it kind of holds a special place within that relationship. And there can be all sorts of back and forth and game playing between mothers and daughters about their relevance, if you like, particularly when the reproductive years end. And so you might get, for example, a young woman who is literally in her prime, her reproductive prime, at the same time as the mother is either heading for or going through the menopause. And so, you know, the fact that they're both at a different stage, developmental stage as well, with, you know, in their own lives, can cause a huge amount of conflict, depending really on how well the mother has navigated those things herself. I mean, I think ultimately we would have to come down on, when I say on the side of the mother, I don't mean necessarily in a positive sense, but we'd have to say the mother is responsible really ultimately for navigating those developmental stages within her own life, in order to to then positively influence her own daughter. I think the ultimate responsibility for that lies with the mother. So there's a lot goes on between, obviously there is, between mothers and daughters at lots of different superposition levels, and that includes the relationship to the masculine, of course. Sorry, Fergal.
Sorry, no, I just had a thought just about what Steve mentioned there, that the or even the image that you have there, there's the spectral quality.
Yes.
That from my understanding in one situation, and what I've seen in other people as well, is that while the mother's motivations and behaviors are grounded in something that might have happened to her or her experience, that has a grounding to it, whereas then the next generation may not have that grounded experience, and then the motivation and behaviors become associated with a spectral thing, so they can be much bigger or not ungrounded, and and amplified as well. I would think.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because the thing about the representation we're looking at the moment is so contemporary. You know, the figure of the father as it appears in the image that we're all looking at suggests the kind of marginalization that is going on or has gone on in the culture more recently. And it's almost as if, you know, it's not as if it's there's a book by a female Jungian, Banny Shorter, her name is, called An Image Darkly Forming. The suggestion being that it is a forming image, and out from the forming image will appear something which is, in terms of figure ground, is more visible. But what we get here in this representation almost is of I would suggest, and it's quite a dated look for the father too, isn't it, in the representation?
Could I comment on that?
Yes, I just finished the point.
Please do,
that he is almost receding, as if the relationship between the mother and the daughter is paramount, and as if his role has been diminished within the context of that representation.
I deliberately wanted that representation to show the near ancestral presence of past states which hang over, if you like, in a family constellation, and have the most immediate learned effect on anyone. So if that was the contemporary father rather than a grandfather or even a great grandfather, depending on the age of the girl, the young girl, the fact that it's that, it is a very different time, and there were things in those times that were not particularly nice for women to have to go through, and that is accepted fully and completely, but that's only the most recent reach, if you like, into a woman's psyche of that representation, because that will go all the way back to the guy in the cave. And it's not necessarily the same image, because each iteration of it, the zeitgeist would have shifted a little.
Yes.
Sometimes not very much for a very long time. But the original laying down, the original primordial representations are the fundamental anticipations biologically that then take on a cultural form. But like what you were saying, Paul, about the influence of mothers on daughters, about how to relate to men. Well, I've seen this in person with lots and lots of women, and also men who've been affected by that. And the competition and rivalry you mentioned is very real, and and some of those things are hidden, but they are present, and people don't speak about it very much. But there's one thing that when I wrote that Victrix trilogy, I think that was 2012. I put an element of that in it. And what I can say is that an Oscar-nominated English actress wanted to play the role of the mother who was going through that, because we still got her audition tapes. It was incredible the way she just understood, because it's collective at that Jungian level, how that scenario would have turned out. And basically what that was is that they were Roman aristocrats, or at least the Magna Mater, the Great Mother, the mother was. I meant Magna Mater in the sense that she was carrying that influence down the generations. And her daughter had married beneath her to a common Roman soldier, who nevertheless had risen up the ranks, but he wasn't quite right. Didn't have the right manners or background. He wasn't an Italic Roman. You know, he was a provincial, half Roman, half British figure, but he'd earned his place through his courage and his commitment, and he was a decent enough guy. But he was attacked at every possible point by her daughter's mother. They got married, they had kids, and so this was now the grandmother in the family. But she was harboring a contrary, secret desire to have the daughter's husband for herself. Now that's a simple statement, and yet that conceals the complexity of that and how that had worked in the life of everyone involved for years. And when the mother, that is to say the Magna Mater, I'll call her that, and the daughter were both in peril of the end of their lives, because they'd been taken hostage by some raiders, very unpleasant people who were going to hold them to ransom and then kill them because the ransom wasn't forthcoming. That's when she made her soul confession, soul, S-O-U-L. And this actress acted that out, and acted out the lines and the emotions with such authenticity. It was deeply moving. She understood that, and that kind of thing happens. Now, I put that in that script because I've encountered this through therapy with a lot of people. It's one of the unspoken things. The rivalry isn't just superficial preening and how they dress up, and whether the mother wants to look like the daughter, make her a mini-me and go out clubbing and all the rest of it, and tell the daughter to be promiscuous. It's not only like that. It can appear in very structured, civilized, I'll call it that from a Roman perspective anyway, situations and scenarios where the repression at a Freudian level brings about an Adlerian compensation, where this particular woman acted as if she hated this guy, and would do anything to, and did do that, anything she could to trash his reputation and get the daughter to split from him, even so far as to go through a kind of Stockholm syndrome with the leader of the people who'd kidnapped them and captured them. That was another story, by the way, because that was the animus in another form. And the daughter was tempted by that at a deep platonic and biological level. But the mother's interest, because she saw the end of their life coming by murder, decided to help her daughter with her divided animus with respect to did she love her husband, or was she all enamored with this guy who'd kidnapped them? By saying, this is the state of me, something you never knew that I kept hidden. She said, it's true and it's not uncommon. Many a mother falls for her daughter's lover. A forbidden love that conceals itself behind a hate, and that kind of. And the way she delivered that and understood all of those lines, I knew she was manifesting as an actor that, because she was able to tap into it. It wasn't tacked on; she tapped in to the understanding of the situation,
which you provided for her.
Yes,
because she knew nothing about the animus.
No,
I would assume. It was very unlikely.
It was never
and it was
discussed.
never discussed. No.
Never discussed.
No.
With none of those scripts, it was
No.
never discussed. The elements, the dynamics were there, and it was sent off to actors, directors, and producers, and then the deep structure and the animation of these universal challenges, which Jungians write about, Jung himself wrote about, that got through without any need for an explanation. Yeah. So there's no, here's the animus, there's the self archetype, there's the shadow, there's the trickster, they're all there, but they're not called that. And then the right way of dealing with a moral failure on the surface to access what is happening, that generates a huge amount of emotion. The emotion then is the door to the meta instincts, and the meta instincts then represent themselves through the person of the actor. She certainly got that right. And the guy who Andrew Howard Mills, who read the part of the invading piratical fellowship, which we call him, he was a clan chieftain from Ireland, a Hibernian. The words that he spoke have impacted women like they're being hit by a hurricane and knocked over. But it's not forceful. He speaks very slowly and deeply and with meaning. And there's another aspect of how the masculine psyche can impact a woman and appear to be positive, but at the very least ambiguous. So it's split, and she doesn't know whether she can trust herself, trust her life, trust her soul with this man. And her own mother had not given her the capacity to understand or interpret an encounter like that, particularly she was married and she had children. But when her mother realized that the end was nigh, so to speak, it was for her, but not for her daughter, it turned out. And in the end, the mother of this woman, the one who made the confession, she actually sacrificed herself. She completed the process of a woman in relationship to the dangerous side of the masculine, and in that sense, she integrated at the moment of the end of her life. In other words, she individuated as much as she could. But the beginning of that process was the confession to her daughter, and that basically what she'd communicated to her was one-sided, based on her own division. And that's this idea. In the case of the animus, is how do we know what's positive or negative? The positive can be negative, the negative can be positive. As you were saying earlier, Paul, they're both present.
They are.
So it's a field of interaction. And when we are pulled into that field, we engage with it according to where we're at in our life and what our individual capacities are under the stress of whatever that scenario might be. So I've actually seen it, which is why I was able to write about this, and I've experienced the angst that people go through when this kind of thing happens, and it appears to break taboos that can't normally be spoken about. Whereas the more trashy and superficial mini-me relationship between a mother and a daughter, let's go out and be promiscuous and go to the clubs and I'll look like you and people will think that you're my sister. That is so superficial and shallow and meaningless compared to something like that, where things are communicated down the line in order to complete something before apparently everybody's going to die. But what that will do at a meta-instinctive level, as you were saying earlier, I think, Fergal, about bringing the meta-instincts online, so it draws out the fundamentals, it makes them come into sharp relief, and we can actually see the truth of the dynamics that have been unfolding. And the older woman and the younger woman never mentioned the biological father. They said he died years ago. He's gone. He is now the spectral spirit. And whatever the truth of him, the representation of him is almost insignificant, because what came through him like an Orthodox Christian iconic window that, you know, was light that was coloured and shaped by the pane of glass of transmission. And that distorted the field around the women, and they didn't realize what was going on between them and what forces were being constellated that would challenge them. That's part of the whole story. The idea of this story is that every character is challenged within the context of their comfort and their beliefs thus far, whilst the world is teetering towards a catastrophic collapse. And how will they respond to that? And that then turns the young woman into what turns out to be a death demon for the woman for the man she thinks she's fallen in love with, who is not her husband. And that man himself has already been hollowed out by a relationship to a very, very powerful woman who's not human. Actually, she's a Irish Celtic deity, Morrigan, hollowed out and turned into a weapon. And that's his fate, that he thinks that this young woman, this young mother, will be his salvation. She will allow him to escape the negative anima in the form of the goddess Morrigan, who has been directing his life and made him empty and soulless. But she can see into him. So you can see how Anima and Animus start to interact then through the basis of projection of platonic and archetypal and biological structures that seek expression to bring about a solution. And out of a context like that, these things happen in ordinary life.
It's a modern myth, Steve. What you've written actually is a modern myth. It is for our time.
Yeah.
Because you only have to look, like I say, at the image on the screen and have a feeling for what's happening in the current zeitgeist. And there's no doubt the masculine is becoming more spectral by the day. And it's interesting. I think I appreciate why you've probably selected that image, because it's kind of, it connects us both forwards and backwards to the masculine in a way, because of where you've kind of dropped in to history with respect to the representation of it. But it probably also represents a time when the sort of traditional family values still existed. And I think men were more appreciated for their masculinity and the meta-instinctual roles that they occupied at that time. So I think it's an interesting selection, an interesting choice of representation. And it actually needs updating. It actually needs to not be so spectral. Excuse me.
That's what I meant. So thank you, Paul. So if that were a Greek Orthodox Christian window, an icon through which light passes, but some light is obscured, then you get a representation that requires you to engage with it to understand it. Like, where has this come from? And am I collapsing that representation into a stereotype rather than an archetype, if I use the Jungian term? And in absence of anything material, the spectral will do. In other words, it will occupy the gap. And of course, it's never so collapsed as this might suggest, because both of those women will live and operate and relate through a wider context that will involve men, and then the men's animas and how they have configured in a similar way, and then how they both project between one another. So, as I say, the actual script and the scenario in that instance was based on a lot of clinical experience of these things, which is seldom talked about. But you pick up on the rivalry between mothers and daughters, and that transition between being reproductive and non-reproductive. Like, the older woman could not have her daughter's husband's children, because she'd gone through that phase. She was an older woman, albeit very elegant and wealthy. She had all of that behind her, and she wouldn't be having more children, so it wouldn't be for that. And this is another thing to understand about animus projections. Sometimes, if you're a male therapist, this is where it kind of transfers over into the platonic as a continuation of differentiation from the biological. So you get an older woman who's had children, can't have any more for whatever reason, and then there's an attraction to a man who is a kind of a spiritual figure in the platonic sense. And when that's elevated, then the rest of that woman's relationships can either be strained, or the woman has to compensate by applying a form of suppression on her drive. And they usually do that, and it's understandable, by applying Adlerian power control over the object that they want that they can't have. So that kind of thing emerges, and working with women who've gone through that, it's extremely difficult for them unless they take that lifespan development perspective to understand why they're in the mess they are, because their default position is to think that I'm just getting old, it's a compensation for that at a reproductive level, or I want to be young again. And that's the wrong kind of young. The young that they want to be is the platonic transpersonal young, to move them on from the first half of life. But if they can't have it for whatever reason, and if it just happens to be their daughter who's got it, then that jealousy can start to emerge as being an erosion of the daughter's marriage, by bringing forth every possible angle of attack on the man's status as it exists, as his future prospects, his character, everything like that. It's undermined, because then if I can't have him, she won't either. If I can't reproduce with him, my daughter, although she may have done, it'll stop there. It won't go on. Whatever the configuration might be. And I say, I'm not attacking women. This is what women have told me.
That's what they do.
It's what they do. Yeah, many of them will actually do. And if we can move on, do you think, to the positive?
Yes,
the positive element? But we've got Jess here. Jess, just to let you know, we might use some of this material for a YouTube video. So if you'd rather opt out of that, that's absolutely fine. No problem at all.
No, it's fine. I don't mind.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah. I just had a question on this point about the mother's animus being more important than the father for a daughter. Like if a woman has a negative animus and she's completely unconscious of it, she hasn't done any work on it, just identified with it and accepts it. Like, isn't she likely to be attracted to a man that mirrors her animus? Like, just I guess I kind of had the idea that like a negative animus complex will seek confirmation in a partner, but are you suggesting that actually it will seek a rectification, or what's the more kind of likely scenario?
I think it can absolutely seek its compensation, Jess. Particularly, I think in a woman who has the innate capacity to be more than what she is at any present moment in her lifespan development. So I think it can certainly seek men out in the environment that will help to heal, if you like, whatever it is that is maladaptive in that woman, for sure. And this is where projection and transference come in again. And as we've said before, very often early on in relationships, the negatives are played down, or they're certainly not they're not visible in a conscious way, because when, you know, two people are, shall we say, infatuated with one another, then the similarities are maximized, and the differences and the difficulties are minimized, and so they're not always obvious at the start of a relationship. So what is very positive at the beginning, say between a man and a woman, can be eroded over time as complexes, which are already present, of course, at the start of the relationship, are mobilized. And those complexes are usually parental complexes, you know, which have been important in terms of how the respective individuals, Anima and Animus, have formed. And when they come online, that's when the nature of the relating between two people starts to change. And it might simply be at first that, you know, the two people concerned react to one another as if they're almost shocked that the other person would hurt them in a particular way. They don't quite know where it's come from. It seems to come out of the blue, but there may be still enough animation, enough steam in the relationship to gloss over that, and to allow the relationship to unfold until, of course, more and more things start to turn up in a way that tends to produce conflict rather than good relating. So all these things are in the mix because it is a field of relationship. You know, so whatever is present at any one time is really very dynamic, isn't it? And maybe even fast-paced if it's a relatively new relationship where, like I say, there's a lot of animation going on, and a lot of feeling good, if you like, a lot of almost inflation on both sides of the equation in terms of feeling good about oneself. So you know, it's a great question, but it's hard to give a sort of a definitive response, because as with all these things, anything to do with relating is so fluid, so dynamic, that it's hard to sort of give a kind of almost an eternal truth about such things. They will be unique to every context, of course, but generally speaking, that's what I would say. I don't know if you want to add, Steve, to that at all.
Well, I agree with what you said, and wholeheartedly that it's a great question. And
yeah,
there's so much that can unpack from that.
Yes.
The downside of the positive animus is one aspect of it, particularly if that's been filtered for a woman through the mother. So it's not direct experience of the masculine, which may be ambiguous or relatively integrated for her only from her own point. But if the mother's been and will continue to be an influence, then the relationships between the mother and the daughter can generate a weakness within the daughter to do with relating to men. That's based on, I'm going to have to say this, there's no other better word really, the almost pathetic configuration of relating to men that's configured within the woman. So there's no edge to it. I don't mean an exaggerated edge like we see out now in the culture, which is just way too far gone, but there's nothing. And she doesn't communicate to the daughter how to defend herself against predatory men. Might signal that you must give in, you must always agree with them, and then everything will be fine. That kind of thing. And then that's delivered through this curring but enveloping persona and interaction from the mother to the daughter. The daughter will pick up the subliminal signal that she should be like a mother, because the daughter obtains her first impression of the idealized form of herself through the mother. In other words, I will be a mother because I will be a woman because my mother's a woman, and I'll be like her. Therefore, I take that on. My self-concept starts its primary imprint from that. So that you then take the mother's animus in through that as well. And the girl might be very vulnerable to the wrong kind of man. the complete opposite of being too aggressive.
Yeah.
And not know where boundaries are or anything like that. So that can be a problem. Other than that, the men in a woman's life, if they're too nice, they're too agreeable, and they generally exist to meet the needs emotionally of the woman, then she doesn't get to test out what it's like to experience the other side of the masculine at all. And her instincts will then start to rumble and get into conflict. And one of the things that women do, some women do at that point, is that they turn on the man and start to bully him. And because he believes through his anima that he should be nice to the woman, regardless of what she does to him, he gradually becomes neutered in relationship to the woman. And the woman then says, I cannot stand this. There is more to the masculine than him. I'll go find someone else who can provide that for me. And that might be under reproductive pressure, for example. The woman might reach that trip point of 28 years of age, where we have both found an awful lot of women start to get into this state, young women, where they're biologically being pushed to find a partner, but the person that they may be with may be too nice and not offer a good, should we say, option. Foil. Or an option. Both are complementary in that regard, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so somebody very different needs to be co-opted to stimulate her to accept their reproductive drives. Another factor that you'll commonly see in situations like that is that if there are some positive traits in the marriage, if it is a marriage relationship, there are absence in the person who is interloping or is potentially an interloper, then those positive traits don't just need to be transferred because there's nothing there to catch them. The other person has to acquire those to meet the woman's expectations of adding to what she's already had. So what's missing in the marriage then also has to have things taken out of the marriage and configured in the other relationship, because then that other person can replace the husband, because this person's got everything then, or it will appear to be that way. And none of this is rational, none of it's cognitive. All of this is the role of the genomic dice and Darwinian pressure testing. It's very, very ancient. Those kinds of configurations can occur, and that can leave a lot of men absolutely stunned, because they've done all the right things, they've shown all the love and everything, but it's not enough. And then the other guy has to have the positive traits that the husband has, or skills or abilities, because then there would be a loss. If she exchanged a husband for the other man, there's a loss. Can't have that. I'll take what I need from this relationship, put it into that context, and then I have an ideal configuration. And this isn't conscious either. It's the genome trying to optimize itself. So these situations can get extremely painful and cause immense distress because people don't know what's motivating them. And it can happen in reverse for the man as well. From the perspective of the anima, he may have an almost idealized situation, but there's a few things where there's friction or it's incomplete, and then somebody offers the incomplete bit but doesn't have the better bits. So if that other person, that other woman can have those better bits as well, then that's a complete gestalt, a complete configuration, and that appears by projection to justify the movement of attention and focus and forward planning from the genome to the ego of the person concerned. So these are very complicated things, and where they're not talked about but they're present, that leads to inertia, and the problem is not resolved, and it will perseverate. So a superficial counselling approach can't tackle that.
I think in the context that you mentioned, Steve, which I think is an interesting one, where you get what appears to be a weak mother because of the state of the mother's animus, essentially, is that eventually bottoms out in the daughter as not just a lack of respect for the masculine, but actually a lack of respect for the feminine. which is actually even more catastrophic in a way, because when women start to lose respect for their own biological sex, clearly that is not a good thing.
Yeah.
But if women aren't modeling what it is to be a strong woman, if you like, as opposed to a woman who is, shall we say, in that classical sense, animus possessed, then, you know, what we understand as being a model of strong femininity for the culture gradually starts to go the way of the man in the image. It becomes more and more spectral as to what that actually is and means. So, you know, there's in some ways there's a lot of responsibility on women to get it right, but I think in some regards they've had too much of it their own way for too long, and it's led to the situation that we find ourselves in now, which I think is so well represented by the image that we're looking at. And we've got to get some kind of meta-instinctual balance back, I think, at the most fundamental level between the sexes before even before some of the cultural changes can start to take place and shift. But I do think I agree with you that the idea of the weak mother who doesn't understand how to relate to the masculine properly. I mean, you know this, you will have known it when you said it, that you could have been referring to my mother there with respect to.
Well, she was one of them.
She was one of them, one of many. No, of course not.
Yeah.
But one of many, and there's no doubt that she was configured in that way. And you could say that she had a weak father, or an ineffectual father, who cheated on her mother. So that was, you know, she had a kind of an ineffectual father, but a father who also betrayed her mother, which clearly wasn't very nice. Somebody who was actually tested for the priesthood as well, but he ended up doing that instead. And she kind of took it upon herself to reject her mother and side with her father, which in some regards I think was a mistake, because I think her mother had some really good qualities that she personally could have benefited from.
Definitely.
But people tend to, and you see this a lot, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Can
I comment?
Yes, of course you can comment. Yeah.
So I'll come back to that, but with respect to the image, the girl could be contemporary.
Yes.
I mean, she could be any time really, from even the late 60s.
Yes, she could.
But contemporary would fit. The mother similarly, probably. But the father and the background are not what you generally see. That's not the kind of living room that you might see.
No.
Particularly in a contemporary sense.
No, it's incongruous in a way.
It's incongruous. It's more congruent with the father.
It is.
So you have a figure and a background which are separate, but form the backdrop to the mother and the daughter.
The template, if you like.
Yeah, and they provide the context for where they're at now, and that's a metaphor for the way that the ancestral psyche works, particularly through recent generations. So and what you were saying, Paul, can you just remind me of all this?
Well, I was just saying about my own mother had a weak animus, and where it, or how it likely formed because of her relationship to her own parents, and the way that they were uniquely configured. But she took the side of her father, psychologically speaking, and by and large rejected the influence of her mother, and at the same time threw away or discarded what was valuable in the feminine as represented by her own mother.
But she ended up, and this is an example, really, she ended up marrying somebody who was not at all like her father.
That's true.
In terms of background or control, or, you know, the sort of Adlerian element was active in a dominant sort of way in the family, whereas her father, as you say, was he was weak. You know, he was probably, I mean, I didn't know him that well, but he struck me as being ineffectual. In a word, but respectable, apart from
yes.
that incidence of infidelity, which your grandmother was a formidable woman when she wanted to be. And that might have been part of it. I don't know. I didn't see directly into their background enough to be able to conclude further than that. But it's a common pattern that takes on local form, doesn't it, in people's lives?
Yeah.
Oh, and the anima works in the same way, just opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too about women, just to add to that, and again, it's an instinctive thing, is that they're very resource focused, which kind of fit in with what you were saying before about the animus in projected form, and how it will look to complete itself in maybe relationship to more than one man, depending on what that individual woman's requirements are for, I guess, her own protection, her own financial stability, and her own biological drive or investment to have children. Yes, absolutely. So all of that will be out there, won't it, in projected form.
So that's an a priori given at a biological instinctive level, that if we move consciously or unconsciously actually away from understanding that, then we have no defense against it.
No, we don't. We absolutely don't.
Because it will just come online. It will just boot up on timed release.
Yes.
And that's when a lot of relationships get into trouble.
Yeah.
Because there's an incongruence between the patterns of lifespan development between people.
Yeah.
It's not the only reason, but it is one, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So the negative animus can be positive and negative, or it can be obviously negative. And it can come directly down the paternal line for a woman, or it can come through the mother. And that's the secret way, if you like. I say secret because it's less than obvious that it does a lot of damage, for which men get blamed. And as we said last time, men have to forgive women for not being their anima, and in order to do that, they have to stop projecting it. They have to localize it in themselves where it belongs, and then in the ancestral male psyche. The women need to do the same thing. They have to stop blaming men for how they are naturally configured by their biology and the platonic drive that's behind even that produces these archetypal representations, which are then coherent with biological pressure as well, because they have the same intent ultimately. But biology is very, very urgent in how it pushes. So I would say that's how fundamentally we understand the practicalities of animus and anima as they actually operate in the world, without turning them into mythological figures. At that point, it's just an amusing and entertaining story. It's like the unanalyzed dream. It comes and goes, and it'll happen again, but we still won't figure out what's going on because it's too impersonal a register. Even though those impersonal factors operate directly through us unconsciously very often.
I think too, just like with the shadow, when we relate properly, we don't have to. Really, the anima and the animus are almost besides the point. Because we can, at that point, we can just talk about relating and the relating function. We don't have to get stuck in polarities.
No. So the shadow disappears when you relate properly. When you relate properly, the anima and animus don't differentiate out into I'd call them parodies, caricatures, stereotypes, which are then projected in order to force us to understand them. They disappear. So relating properly is really, really important. But who amongst us knows what that is when we start out in life? We don't. We just get pushed. We're pushed from within, and then we're regulated from without by other people and situations, including the historical times within which we live. So the work is the work of the ego. And Freud was right about that. That occupies that unfortunate position between inner and outer. And if the ego gets it right, then we have a reasonable life. And if not, then we're under attack from the inside and the outside. And there's your recipe for neurosis.
Yeah, we have to be able to have a relationship to instinct, don't we? Or the ego has to have a relationship to instinct, and kind of negotiate its way through with it, along with it, rather than, you know, just repressing it, and therefore, or rather than repressing instinct and then becoming a victim of it. We can negotiate with instincts to some extent.
Oh yeah,
you can do that. We don't have to just fall victim to them.
You can, and there's lots of good indications that things, even though just a few years ago at a biological level, were thought to be impossible. I mentioned it, I think, last time about Dennis Noble's work, and how he was forcing Richard Dawkins to accept that the genome can be modified within an individual directly by interaction. And that was thought to be impossible. People who have recently got PhDs in microbiology denied that would ever be possible, and that it was a fantastical idea. And now someone of Dennis Noble's level, he's one of the top biologists in the world without question, evolutionary biologists, has reversed that round, not just through a philosophical model, but there's actually work that demonstrates this, laboratory work. And he was feeding that back to Richard Dawkins. It's in the Discord server. It's one of the I think 11 suggested videos I put up recently. So we can change what we've inherited, and we've said to the neuropsychoanalysts, for example, and they did publish this, that in our view, and of course they could say, well, that's just your view, but in our view, human instincts evolve as well, and the Panksepp requires a context to operate. If it doesn't, it fires at random. At least it certainly seems that way, as if it's trying to hit a target that might be there, even if it's not. And the fact that it's not, but it still fires, or they still fire, means that we develop frustration. That fits a fundamental Freudian model, but the neuropsychoanalysts are a bit shy of that, because the idea of meta instincts for them are very close to archetypes, of course, and Jung is he's still persona. Yes, he's beyond the pale, persona non grata. He's all of those things. So they couldn't admit to that. Primary drives, which they call emotions, which I think is debatable. I think they are drives to bring about instincts. They identify instinctive pressure for being the instinct itself, rather than the drive to make the instinct work itself out and meet conclusion in the environment. And the reason I would argue for that is that wherever the innate psyche, the ancestral psyche, is actually located, and I say that because it's easy to say, well, it must be in the genome, and then you have people like Michael Levin saying it's not. It's in this platonic domain, and what we would say is it's in both places simultaneously, and both are required for the whole thing to work, which is not just a compromise between the two polarized positions. It's likely to be the case. And I did mention last time about terminal lucidity and how that challenges purely material based models. And Levin's work, and also Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, and the role of microtubules, that kind of thing, to suggest there is a field-based nature to consciousness, but it needs a brain as well. So it needs both, and the brain needs the genome, or else there's no brain. Also needs the platonic domain. So all of these things have to work together. So that's the ground state, and then the ego emerges out from that, and it's tasked with making sense of it. That's a big ask, really. So the ego doesn't really make that much sense of it. It tries to adapt on the basis of learning and conditioning, and that's where complexes come from. They're opportunistic. They say, okay, this is a really nice situation. We're all nicely divided here, aren't we? So I'll just produce more of my core ideation, and I'll occupy the ego, and I'll meet my needs. And that's what happens basically with how complexes form, and how complexes generate or thrive on instinctive conflict. The conflict is usually instinctive first, before it ever becomes psychological. And then we might see it in the environment through projection, transference, and what have you. So we get the typical Freudian, basically, conflict between the id and the superego, the pleasure principle and the reality principle, and then the Jungian complexes form. So the correction seems to be for the ego to begin to understand whence it came. In other words, what is the blueprint for its own experience? And that's at a material level and it's at a platonic level. And it has an intention, which Jung correctly identified, an intentionality to complete itself in the life of each individual and within the lifespan of the species as a whole. And you guys know that the way to do that is for the ego to first of all realize it and then to do something about it, which means the ego has to stop being itself. It has to dissociate in a safe way in order to receive information from different superposition states. This is true with what the Jungians call the Anima and the Animus. And if you can do that, you take an awful lot of angst, terrible angst that appears for people when they go through this kind of thing that we've been discussing today. The emotions are huge because they do constellate meta-instinctive scenarios which themselves may be in conflict. So we have to be able to do something about receiving that without conflict and to offer a resolution that includes them. And at that point, the Panksepian drives calm right down. And that happens, and it works for a neurotic conflict, and it works for a lifespan development or individuation neurosis as well. So being able to receive and communicate and go on a journey of interaction, a dialectical journey that involves transformation, solves these problems. If not, we're the victim of things we are unconscious of on the inside and on the outside, and that's a hell of a mess for anybody to be in and to have to go through. So they're the contexts, aren't they, for the negative and positive Anima and Animus to operate through.
Do you ever see people, like, if there's a lot of animus and anima projection going on in a relationship, like, will individuals change to match their partner's anima or animus?
Yes. Yeah, that will happen. An example would be where I'll use the example of a woman because that's the context for today. A woman enters a relationship and unconsciously starts to project their father onto her husband or partner. The influence of that may cause the partner to start to become like the representation that they've received through the projection or the transference, and that then confirms the state that the woman was in. And the reason that works is because the attachment bond from the man in this scenario to the woman is such, he doesn't want to disturb her. He wants to relate to her. So she's insisting that he's a certain way. He will adopt that at least a little bit at first, and then it gets incremental. And gradually he stops being himself and becomes only the transference or the projection. And that can happen in reverse easily as well from the other side of the equation. So that's an example where it's parental, but it can be from a past experience, a past relationship, because that's the complex-based experience that we have to make a prediction about a new relationship. In other words, it's our past experience. And the neuropsychoanalysts go on about this a lot, talk about prediction errors. And they have a point insofar as they're describing something at a manifest level. But our argument with them is another place they don't want to go is intuition. The intuition, following Jung, is perception by way of the unconscious. Functionally, that's what it does. So it understands patterns and it makes representations based on patterns that contain both the problem and potential solutions, which is why it seems too much at times, because it's just big. But the intuition, when we receive what it contains as an impression and we don't get scared off by it, means that we can begin to unpack what is coming through to us in the form of intuition, and then we learn more than we would if we just went to a mechanistic prediction error mode, where we have to change our predictions. It's really mechanistic. And the last thing anybody who's feeling something wants is to be turned into a cognitive abstraction about themselves that you are making a prediction error. No, I'm feeling something. And then he would say, well, yes, of course you are, because emotions are feelings. That's why you're conscious, because you feel something. But your feelings are making a prediction error. And then what does the person do then? They feel completely overwhelmed, not able to understand. But if you can help them to go into an altered state of consciousness and receive intuition, the drive pressure drops right down, the polarities disappear, and they suddenly start to feel better. And that's the best proof of that something's been done properly, is when the affect changes into something that's agreeable, because we're moving towards health instead of disharmony and conflict. But the neuropsych people don't want to talk about intuition, because that's not something that they can put into the brain in a reductive way.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Chad. Okay, Ryan. Hi, hello, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Very well, thank you. Nice to hear you.
I felt, yeah. It's nice to. It's always nice to hear you guys. I was just thinking about what situations we might find ourselves in our own lives where intuition is available to us, and I know it's generally speaking always available to us, but I was thinking particularly about mentor-mentee configurations of relationships, I guess, where what we're learning from the mentor might be too big for us to, if they themselves have encountered reality in an intuitive way, and they're not just faking it, for example, what they've encountered or what they're trying to share with us might feel too big. But that's part of why, to harken back to the Slade song about feeling takes time. I know that's in a different context and it's meant to communicate something else.
Yeah.
But I think metaphorically, I think it matches with this kind of situation too. So the taking time part, which is why you always emphasize the not hurriedness of it. I feel like in my own experience that's been completely, I would not be without that. I know there's a Latin phrase to match what that phrase is, but the learning would not have occurred without the lack of hurry, because that's how that gives it the space, I guess, in time to unfold.
Yeah. Paul, would you like to come back on that first?
Well, I would just, I mean, if you're maybe describing the role that Steve and I might occupy, I think
he does have
definitely.
But he also has other mentors
of
as well.
Course, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was also curious about potentially people who were, I know there were mentors in your life.
Yeah.
And if there were any who were female.
Psychopoms, yes, I would say.
And for both of you as well. Yes, sorry.
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. Yes, but probably outside of my immediate family context. I can't say there's anyone within my immediate family, either past or present, that I would personally refer to for that modeling. I don't believe they exist. That's how abysmal my family are or have been. But yes, absolutely outside of it, for sure. Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't preclude such people existing. They are there. Yes. They will be there, even just at a statistical level. They're going to be there. Yeah. So well, I actually, and I was feeling into the representation of some of them when you were speaking. Actually, Ryan, the best way that I found to navigate my way through was this. First of all, see them in their own context, which means then that we don't appropriate them to ours through projection and transference. That
Right.
such people usually adopt a role towards us on an impersonal level, but it's still delivered personally. So in other words, they're referring to something which is beyond the immediate moment, that usually lies in the future. And it's a kind of investment at a humanistic level to help someone who has the right qualities, but not to intrude too much into their life. And when I think of the guy who headed Charing Cross up, for example, he wasn't a perfect man, but nobody is. But that he did well, he did better than anybody that I've ever known.
That's true.
And his faith in us was such that conferred a burden on us, I think, that was a pressure test to see, well, are we capable of holding that and taking it into the future? And something similar with Anthony Stevens, and something similar but different with Franz Jung, because both of them went on intuition. Franz was absolutely open about that. That it was only that decided it for him, about whether he would, I wrote and asked if we could come over, and he said, I have letters all the time and I seldom answer any of them. And then he said, but an intuition from the unconscious told me to invite you over. But when we got there, he asked questions that invited us to generate a field of representation to him that he could receive in a broad way. And also he wanted to know the context of our background and how dissimilar that was to the people next door, because the Jung Institute is essentially next door. It's at some distance because Jung's garden was rather large. So next door to 228 Seastrasse and Koosnap is still some distance. But we were not like them, and he knew we were not like them. And he knew we were bringing other things. And he went on intuition. And that, for us, meant that this is a huge responsibility, because he's given so much faith, but it's not blind faith. Because it would definitely have been the case that if we had not delivered, he would have withdrawn. And that's something about mentors that people who want to be mentored don't always appreciate, that it is a kind of a privilege that is transcendent, it's transpersonal, it's not based on transference. It's not like these people replace your parents. They occupy a different state and a different kind of relationship. They will not try to control your life. They will give you every help that they can. And they'll do it because it's the right thing to do, because something at another level says, offer this. And then you leave it to them and see whether they flower or they don't.
Yeah.
And not everybody does. And sometimes it seems that the intuition that brought someone into relationship in a mentor role to a mentee was not completely understood. That there were other factors in there that weren't emphasized sufficiently. And in that, or in such cases, it then appears that the intuition serves several superposition and complementary purposes that were not obvious. In other words, there was an efficient cause within it that would bring other things about that had to happen. So the mentee relationship was never genuine, and it had to die away. And that always arises in the person of the mentee. If we'd have let Franz Jung down, Peter Nixon, Anthony Stevens, George Engel, Ernest Rossi, if we'd have let John Kane, if we'd have let any of them down, they would have stopped supporting us. Not out of spite, but because we would have, in letting them down, we would have let down what they believed was our potential to move things on for other people. So that dispenses with transference, which means it stops, when you're in the mentee role, making transference demands on other people to become parents to you, and then to have all of your, or whoever it might be, frustrations in a parental way dumped on the other person. That should never happen. There should be mutual respect, a proper distance, but full support, because we share something. And it was a Charing Cross that they said to me about, Peter Nixon actually said to me about, you and Pauline are fellow labourers in the vineyard of the human soul. And that still impacts me. I've never forgotten that. And I try and give that to other people, because that's what we're there for. We should not simply taste the wine that others have pressed through the effort of their life. We should do it for ourselves, but with the idea that what we produce is a gift to others. Whereas if we're narcissistic, we simply take. And this is something that I've said to people who I've attempted to mentor in the past, is that if you can receive, you'll gain more than if you try to take.
Yeah.
If you take, you'll get a small amount. If you receive, you'll get everything. Can you receive? And that's based on what happens with the ego when it makes demands on the unconscious. I will take. You won't. No, none of us will, because we won't get out of the bathroom mirror. But if we receive, then we will definitely get the information we need to move on. And in integrating that which we receive, we realize we have an obligation to other people that is absent in a narcissist. It's just not there. It was never there. They're very good at facsimiling things, but there's no substance in them at all. For example.
And even then, you can, if your nose is on, if it's screwed on right, you can usually detect that.
Yeah, and there are people who.
And I just mean,
if
the person who's a mentor is facsimiling that, you can.
Oh yeah.
You can sniff it out very early on.
You can sniff it
but
out.
Sometimes circumstances don't always allow you to enact the right course of action, because life is complicated, isn't it?
It is.
But just to go back to what Ryan said, and also complement what you're saying, Steve, that very often mentors do gift more than an individual person can receive. And so this is where the idea of things taking time comes in. Sometimes it is only in retrospect that things make sense. That you can look back at, I understand now that makes that fits in, and that is the process. It is something that we do to some extent have to be patient with. I mean, it will be true for us still now with some of the people who we consider to be mentors for us. That their influence is still unpacking, and still influencing even now. And that seems to be the way that it is. That seems to be the natural progression of things. So I think when it's given genuinely to others by mentors, then there is a tendency to give more than what that individual person appears to be able to cope with at any one time. But it's as if the mentor sees into the field of that individual and understands their potential to be such that in time they will be able to probably receive most, if not all of it. So that's where intuition comes in. You see someone's potential. We know that with time they will be capable of understanding more. And if there are things that they don't understand right now, that's okay. It will come with time.
It will. And where there are people who fail, it is an allegory. The sorcerer's apprentice is the selective dynamic that operates. The idea of someone who inflates and wants to take more, and they go behind the back of the vessel that's being built for them, so that they are nurtured safely, and they then release aspects of their character which are out of control and can potentially destroy them, certainly destroy what appeared to be their positive potential. And I've used that to warn people in the past. Don't be the sorcerer's apprentice. You have to earn every step, and it does take time. And like you say, Paula, those people I listed before, who we consider, I think it's fair to say,
yes.
are our mentors in this field. They're all deceased.
Yeah.
And physically, but it would be so easy to ignore it and just move on to someone else. But that will never happen. As long as I exist, I will never do that. I will never betray them. And not because of a slavish attachment, because each of them were a portal to the field that they were embodying, which was the thing that was of ultimate importance. That's not to reduce them as human beings, because without them there would not have been any transmission. And also, you can't transmit if someone is not receptive. I will honor all of them, and I will do everything I can to keep their teachings alive in the minds and lives of others. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Obviously. And I see what you mean too as well about without them, it couldn't have been transmitted.
No. Yeah. There's this notion of heart-to-heart transmission, which exists in the East as well. And they have some problems, particularly in China and Japan, where it's very hierarchical. In China, it's because of Confucianism, which underpins everything that's there. But they have embedded within that ideas which is so important, that they say the transmission can happen in an instant, and that obligates you. And they have a saying, for example, a teacher for a day is a father for life, if it's a male teacher. And that day, that one day might be sufficient for something to pass into you that then opens up other things that come through. So the transmission can occur that quickly, but it relies on the character of the recipients.
Yeah.
And the Darwinian pressure is that you may pour something into a broken vessel and it just pours out everywhere as an absolute mess. But some good, nevertheless, may come from that in other ways. So that's the way that we work, and that's our attitude towards therapy. That's why we don't encourage transference. It's why we don't, for therapeutic reasons, why we don't encourage anything that's extended in terms of therapeutic contact, because it's not necessary. That doesn't feed anybody's best interests really at all. And one of the things that we had in our consulting room in the NHS, the last one that we had the most control over what went in, is that we had, it's only a garden ornament, but it was quite a largish one, of a tortoise. And that was always positioned by the seat or the chair. It was a reclining sort of sprung chair, which people would generally sit in because it was comfortable. It would be alongside them, but a little bit forward so they could see it. And there was also a patient, and probably still got me an image, I think it was from India, of a tortoise as well. That was in there. But that came from a dream I had, which I told Franz Jung about, to do with our own calling. And the fact that for us, the tortoise is slow, but the tortoise beat the hare. So it's not how fast you move in an absolute sense. It's the fact that by taking your time, you become faster. And by being too quick, you become slower. So adjusting to relative time. And if we do the right things towards the inner world speeds up in its delivery, but it doesn't feel hurried, it feels relaxed. So it'd be like going at very, very high velocity, metaphorically towards light speed, but we don't notice the acceleration has been so gradual, we don't feel the G-force. And we're really going because we're doing natural things and we feel comfortable with it.
Right.
Whereas if we go too slow, the tension is there immediately. And that produces the transference that the analysts think is necessary. And we say it's not necessary.
In which case that's imposed on the mentee.
Yes.
They're being artificially slowed down.
Yeah, they
in
are.
many ways. And I think arguably it's better from the mentor's perspective to give more than to give less, because those who are capable have the potential to receive it will receive it, and those who don't won't.
We were always pressured, weren't we?
Yes.
You know, like Anthony Stevens' idea was, okay, you've put these things together and I'm absolutely delighted that you've done that, but that basically means you've got to do something with this.
Yeah.
And George Engel the same, and Peter Nixon. It was like, you know, I wondered, and I said to him at one point, should I do medicine? Should, you know, this is so impressive. And he said, Steve, medicine will spoil you. In other words, he'd seen something that shouldn't be processed in that way, but should do something else. And he supported it, and he put it in writing. I will always support you and Pauline. You know, he lived that to the end of his life. That meant a huge amount, not in a sentimental way, in that ordinary gratifying way, but in a transpersonal sense. It meant an obligation towards what was coming through him, and respect as well, to respect what people have done, what they've earned through their labor, and what they're prepared to give. And if they recognize in us, whoever we might be, the potential to give to others, then the choice is easy then to say, I will attempt to work with this person and offer them a privileged position, which brings a responsibility with it of being mentored, of being guided. Not everybody can live up to that, but we don't insist anybody should, but we do offer it to some people. But they self-select. The best people self-select.
Right. Yes.
They can't just demand it. They don't need to, because it's in them. But as I say, occasionally there's a mistake.
Right, and that part of Pauline said that part of that is due to because life is complicated.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes. Doesn't always maybe allow us to cut loose in the way that we might like to, particularly because everything, you know, there may be an extended feel that is unseen, that people don't see, that's part of the overall picture, a scenario that you find yourself in, and has to be accommodated to some extent. Sometimes it's only when that resolves out that the final cut can be made, or the final ties can be cut, and then it's right to do so.
Yeah,
that could be true of any relationship.
We will give every opportunity to people who are suffering, rather than deeply flawed. That's a big difference. Someone who's deeply flawed in character, that's untenable. Someone who's just suffering, that's completely different, particularly if they are treading the grapes themselves. They're putting in the labor. They have character and calling. Such people, at a fundamental humanistic level, deserve respect and deserve support. It's just the way life is, and you find good people in so many places. I mean, I mentioned people we would consider to be mentors, but there have been plenty of psychopomps who were very ordinary people and had no particular intimate relationship with us, but provided the right guidance in our life from a very simple position. But you could tell something was, they were like a medium in that sense, that it came through. And that's an important thing to be aware of, the opportunities to receive from people like that, and a narcissist can't do it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, because these people,
I think part of the I think that's the key.
Yeah, a narcissist can't learn from people who they would consider to be of low status, ordinary people. Can't do it. And yet some of the most profound wisdom comes through ordinary people.
Yeah.
and what they communicate is the same thing. It's outside of them personally, but there is a wisdom there that's just dropped in, as you know, ingressed, as Michael Evan might say. It's come into their character in the moment of interaction with any of us. It gives us some form of understanding of a direction we need to go in, and it feels right at an intuitive level because it is intuition. So yeah, there's a lot to respect in people who are ordinary.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with an academic background either. Nothing. That's not in and of itself a valid variable. But all the people I mentioned, bar John Kane, were academics. John Kane was a very ordinary person.
Yeah, there's a tendency to overlook people like that. I think particularly for narcissists, where you see the compensated inferiority in the form of superiority. So then they look down on people like that.
Yeah.
And can't see any intrinsic value in them as human beings. So immediately, you know, the door to that, to be able to experience something that might be beneficial to them, is closed.
Yeah.
And that's how they are. That's how they're configured.
Yeah.
And you know, you could pour a lot of energy into them, and it will go nowhere. It would just all drain away.
The idea, or the principle, by their libido shall ye know them, applies. You apply that test, particularly over time. You see what is so fundamentally conserved in their nature, that it is immutable and that it is harmful and damaging. But people who are just suffering are capable of change. They're capable of accessing latent potential in themselves and reaching others and helping them without being resentful about doing it, without treating people as if they're just muck and nothing and they're far too important. So that's an acid test. If you apply that to someone, by their libido shall you know them. What do they actually do?
Yeah. I appreciate that we're at time. I don't know if you guys want to tie that back to the negative animus.
Well, one of the ways of navigating through all of these very human somebody's
got a bit of feedback.
Just mute Marcelo on that. One of the ways of applying what we've been discussing to Anima Animus issues and generational relationships and so forth is to lock, if we can, a representation of the intuitive aspect of the field. Then we see things clearly then. So we see figure and ground, like in this image. And then we can start to understand people without judgment, even if we can see what they might be doing wrong. Then we can help them, or at least we can offer some kind of help. But if we simply react to it, or we become polarized ourselves, then we've just been absorbed into the field of whatever complexes that are mobilized at that time. So yeah, to bring that back, and our principle when it comes to therapy is this: we might use the term brief, but we don't mean hurried. But things will happen quickly, and that is such a relief to people when it happens for them. And then everybody moves on.
That's so cool.
Well, we've learned it from other people to acknowledge them.
Yes. That's the only place I ever learn anything anyways. Well, it's in rapport with other people. I would, if I were to propose that, I'd say that's how it happens.
Your field is outer and inner, isn't it? You and Cass, and you know that we know that, and that the good things that you do for nature and for relating, and you're very young people at the beginning of your journey. You've got such a lot ahead of you, and time might feel hurried. It isn't. You keep going as you are. You will actualize. You will do it. It will happen for you. So that's true for everyone here. no matter what age we're at or what's gone before us. But it can be particularly clearly described for young people, because there's always an instinctive pressure that they're feeling to do things quickly. But I can promise you that the speed will emerge by approaching it in the right way, without being hurried.
Thank you.